Hi, I'm Lil Newman, the host of Viewpoint. Welcome. And I'd like to introduce my co-host, Susan Solomon, Executive Director of Drug Crisis in Our Backyard.
Hi, how are you? So nice to see you.
And I'd like to introduce our guest today, Ashley Brody, Executive Director of Search for Change. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good to have you. So Search for Change, can you tell us about Search for Change? What is it?
Absolutely. So Search for Change is a nonprofit organization. We were incorporated in 1976 essentially to provide housing and support services for adults with serious mental illness. I think we know many people in our society live with conditions like depression, anxiety, and sometimes more serious afflictions. We were established to provide housing and a safe haven for adults who are being discharged from state-operated psychiatric centers and to really support them in making that journey towards independence, eventually moving on, becoming more self-sufficient. And over the past 40 years that we've been in operation, we've diversified our services to provide vocational support, some care management, and a host of other services, all in support of individuals living with mental health and related conditions.
So is it just they live an apartment alone, or is it shared, or you have different levels?
We actually have different levels. When we opened in 1976, we started as a small 6-bed group home in Peekskill, and since then we've grown to incorporate more residences like that, as well as shared apartments and single apartments. And the housing configurations are all different, and they provide different degrees of support. So for instance, in the community residences, we'll have people who will live as a group and receive staff support on a 24-hour basis. Oftentimes individuals who come into that setting will come from hospitals or family care environments or others where they may not have had the experience living independently and will want to get a lot of support in doing so. And then we also have a network of shared apartments and also what we call scattered site supportive housing, single apartments where people will live on their own, receive some care management support. But everybody who's living with us will receive some measure of support and some kind of living accommodation that's designed to maximize their independence. And our hope is that people will eventually move through our continuum and live independently or as independently as possible.
Now, when they come to the end of the cycle, which would be in an apartment by themselves, and then they're ready to move out on their own, do you help them find an apartment and kind of make that transition seamless for them?
Absolutely, we do. And that unfolds a little bit differently for each person. We have, again, what we call our Scattered Site Supportive Housing Program, which is really a permanent housing program for people who want or need permanent housing. Some people who live there will have graduated from our group residences or our shared apartments, and when they get into the Scattered Site Supportive Housing, they'll receive some financial assistance from us, as well as some care management support, and that can be a permanent living arrangement for people.
So that's theirs,
So that's theirs, exactly. And it's typically a regular apartment in the community. It's not a property that belongs to Search for Change per se. It's just a regular apartment, and our tenants, our residents, will hold a lease, will provide some financial and care management support for as long as they want or need it. So some will get housing in that fashion. Others may apply for other types of rent subsidies that are available on the market. Some may no longer need a rent subsidy. They may get to a point where they have achieved great gains in their recovery and they might be working and self-sufficient and may not need financial support. But the majority of residents who graduate from our programs continue to need some kind of financial support because we know rent is expensive in this area.
Right. So where are you located? I know that you're in Westchester and Putnam, but could you give us an idea of like where in those counties?
Absolutely. I mentioned when we were established back in the 70s, we started out in Peekskill. That residence is no longer in operation, but in the, let's say, late 70s or 80s, we opened up a series of residences in Westchester, and that includes Larchmont, Mamaroneck, Scarsdale, Greenburgh, and then we have a network of shared apartments in a lot of those same communities, and also some in northern Westchester and southern, and then individuals who live in our scattered site apartment program live all over Westchester County and Putnam. That includes regions as far south as Mount Vernon and Yonkers, all the way up to Peekskill, Mohegan Lake in Westchester, and then all over Putnam County, but largely Brewster, Mahopac, Carmel, basically the county seat. And in Putnam County, it's interesting how we came to encompass Putnam County. For many years, we had a shared apartment program in Putnam and Mahopac, and then in the late 90s, I want to say 1998, we merged with one of our sister agencies in Putnam, known as Village Housing. And that was a small operator of housing and support services based out of Carmel, a 14-bed community residence in Carmel, and some shared apartments in Brewster. And we merged with Village Housing in the late 1990s, and through that merger, We acquired additional units of housing in Carmel, Brewster, Mahopac, and we also expanded some of our vocational services into those regions as well. So our residential services really are all throughout Westchester and throughout Putnam. In Westchester, I'd say largely the central portion, like areas in proximity to White Plains, and then in Putnam County, again, we're in Brewster, Mahopac, Carmel, the main population centers, if you will, in Putnam.
What are the services? You said vocational?
Correct. So in our residential programs, the services that we provide are what we would call psychiatric rehabilitation services by our lingo. We don't provide treatment per se. All of our residents, all of our clients typically have some type of relationship with a mental health treatment provider, somebody who they may see to prescribe medication, could be a doctor, a nurse practitioner, a psychopharmacologist, and that's not someone who's affiliated with Search for Change. That could be someone who works in an area hospital or a day treatment program or a clinic. What we provide, what our staff provide, are all those other ancillary support services. For instance, we help people to manage their medication, to get refills if they need to, or to take it as prescribed. We help people to learn how to budget money or to learn how to use public transportation. We do help people go back to work or go to work for the first time if they haven't had the opportunity, and that can include anything from developing a resume to getting some volunteer job experience to finding a job in the community and getting placed. So everything that we do is really about helping people to achieve their life goals, and most of our residents have the same goals that we do.
Right.
They want to have a nice home, they want to have successful relationships, they want to have some type of job or meaningful activity, the American dream that we all aspire to, and that's our role, is to support people in that. So we work in partnership with our residents treatment providers to provide those basic day-to-day support services to help people move those obstacles out of the way and achieve their recovery in whatever form it comes.
Is there a waiting list?
Interesting. There is and there isn't. It all depends, right? As in a good economist would say, it depends. In Westchester, in most cases, there is. In Westchester, there's a lot more competition for scarce resources, and this is, frankly, one of the biggest challenges that we face right now. I've worked with my agency for almost 23 years. It'll be 23 years next month. And I can honestly say that never before have I seen such a crisis in need, such a mismatch between supply of housing and the demand. And there are many reasons for that. We know that affordable housing is scarce, supportive housing is scarce, only more so as our economy changes. We also live in an area where housing is notoriously expensive, and wages don't keep up with the cost of living, especially the cost of rent. And the same is true of the affordable housing market. So that translates into a wait list, and especially in a population center like Westchester, we have a lot of people competing for a scarce resource. We have a lengthy wait list. In Putnam, it varies. Putnam is a more rural community, of course. We don't have quite as many people competing for the available beds. For our community residence program, we sometimes have a wait list, not always. For our independent living program, we usually do. For the intermediate level that I've described, what we call our apartment treatment program, we actually have vacancies, and we tend to have vacancies at that level, which is unusual. If you talk to most housing operators of this type around the state, they would say they all have wait lists and they're looking to develop more housing.
Is that the one that has 6 units to 6 beds to a unit? Is that what you're talking about?
So we have a community residence in Carmel. We also have that independent living program, and then we have an intermediate level, our apartment treatment program. Typically, there we'll have 2 or 3 people per apartment unit.
Got it.
So it's typically a shared apartment with single bedrooms, or sometimes a mix of single and shared bedrooms. And individuals who live there often have graduated from the group residence. Not always. Some may enter directly from another source. But it provides what we call an intermediate level of support. So there isn't staff there 24 hours a day. But they'll come by on a daily basis or maybe a few times a week and just provide additional support for people who may need that to be successful. It just so happens that we have far more units of housing of that type in the county than we seem to have a need for at this point, which is unusual. And I think there are many reasons for that. Our service population has changed. We're working with individuals who in some cases have fairly intensive service needs and may go to a community residence initially, and they may not necessarily be candidates for that intermediate level of care. We have individuals who may just want to live independently and may not want to share living accommodations with other people. So I think there's been some changes in the demographic that we serve, also some changes in the housing market that has brought us to a point where we're looking at how we might be able to redesign some of those housing programs to better meet the need. Because we know there's a need in Putnam County.
What are your thoughts on that?
Good question. So we have a few thoughts on that. What we know is that there is still a great need for housing, in Putnam County and Westchester, everywhere. There's also a need for what we call crisis stabilization or hospital diversion type housing. Now, right now in New York State and throughout the country, we're in the midst of healthcare reform, and we're looking at ways that we can help people to stay out of the hospital.
Right.
I think one thing that we know, even those of us who aren't familiar with healthcare but listen to the news, know that hospitals are expensive, that hospitals don't often produce the best outcomes for people, and we all want to stay healthy and stay away from the hospital if we can. That's true for all of us. I think a lot of housing providers and social service providers are finding ways that they can be creative in lending support to people that will help them to stay out of the hospital and also stay away from the emergency department if they can. Many people who we serve still go to the emergency department as their first course of action if they have a problem. We want to try to stay away from that because it's expensive. It's also traumatic for people. It doesn't produce the best outcomes. And we're all trying to work to come up with better community-based alternatives. So we know that there's a need for many types of service out there, including crisis stabilization, hospital diversion. So one of the ideas that we're putting forth to our sponsors, our stakeholders, is a redesign that will allow us to capture some of the resources that are put into our housing program to repurpose for crisis stabilization, hospital diversion, maybe some short-term transitional housing for people who might need it, but who aren't necessarily candidates for our longer-term transitional. I think what we want to come up with ideally is like a hybrid model that can maybe meet many different needs, and I think that's what we're finding could be most effective because we get calls every day of people who need some type of residential support, but usually it's more a transient support or an emergent support, something different from what we historically provide, and that's what we want to do in order to meet the current need.
You know, I'm thinking, how do people get into Search for Change housing?
Good question. So, in the beginning, people used to apply just directly to our agency. And by I say in the beginning, I mean from the time that we were founded up until I'd say around 1998, 1999, about 20 years ago. Anyone who was interested could apply to us directly. Now, we are licensed and funded by the New York State Office of Mental Health. New York State has several state agencies that oversee nonprofit, and in some cases for-profit, although Search for Change is a nonprofit, service providers that deliver service to vulnerable populations. So we operate under the auspices of the New York State Office of Mental Health, an arm of state government. They establish the admission criteria. Our services are open, our residential services are open to adults, and by adults I mean anyone who's age 18 years of age or older, who has what's defined as a serious mental health condition. I mentioned before, and as many of us know, there are many adults, many Americans living with anxiety, a depressive disorder, different types of mental health conditions, and in all likelihood we will all experience one or know somebody who has been throughout our lifetime. Those individuals are not necessarily candidates for our services because most people who are living with mental health conditions live with mental health conditions. They don't need specialized residential accommodations or special support. They might need some treatment, they might need some services, but they don't necessarily need a supportive residential program. Our programs were set up by OMH to really provide housing for individuals with more serious and chronic health conditions. So it was the case once upon a time that anyone who met those criteria could apply to us directly, and we would then be able to screen them and place them at the appropriate level. In 1999, thereabouts, the state recognized that this resource was becoming increasingly scarce, and the state, the Office of Mental Health, and other stakeholders wanted to make sure that it was being used appropriately, basically being triaged the way that a hospital does, and allocated to those individuals who need it the most. So around that time, the state instituted what are known as single points of access. And each county throughout New York State, with a few exceptions, operates a single point of access, and that acts as a central gatekeeper through a local county department of mental health that receives applications, vets them, and makes preliminary assignments based on an assessment of need.
Got it.
So the best analogy I can come up with is one of triage. You know, if you're in a hospital where emergency room and 3 people come in, and you can only treat one at a time, you want to make sure you treat those with the most emergent need first. A SPOA is a way of doing triage in a residential basis.
SPOA?
SPOA, correct. It stands for single point of access, and it's known as a SPOA for short.
So
each county,
application.
Exactly. Each county in New York has a SPOA process administered by its what they call the local governmental unit, which is sort of the county arm of the Office of Mental Health. Yeah.
So the application has to be gotten from the LGU?
Well, it can be gotten from various sources. For instance, we post it on our website. You can get it through the county LGU. You can get it through various sources, but it has to go through the county local governmental unit, the county Department of Community Mental Health, or in some cases social services. Here in Putnam County, I know the two are merged. We have a county Department of Mental Health and Social Services. Westchester County has a distinct county Department of Mental Health that administers its single point of access. So each county does it a little bit differently, but the general idea is the same, that the county acts as the central gatekeeper. That's not to say that the residential operators don't have a role in it. So if we receive a referral for someone who needs placement, it will come through our SPOA. We would still interview the individuals, try to come up with our own assessment based on our meeting, our review of that individual's material. Most importantly, their stated preferences. We want to meet people where they're at and try to accommodate them in accordance with their need. But it's a partnership that we've worked out with the state government in order to make sure that we're using our resources in the best way possible.
Right. And it's sort of like a gatekeeper.
Exactly.
They're the gatekeeper to make sure you don't spend the money.
Essentially, yes, absolutely.
Right,
absolutely.
People getting the services.
And you know, I think that since the SPOA has been in operation, a lot's been said, written about it. There are a lot of different opinions about it, as there are about anything the government does. And from my perspective, as with anything for that matter in this life, it has its advantages and its disadvantages, its pros and its cons. You know, there's some ways in which it has achieved its intended outcomes. I think some of the critiques I've heard about it involve some bureaucracy, which is to be expected. If you are adding another layer to an admissions process, you are inevitably lengthening the process. But part of the reason you lengthen that process is to make sure that things are being done properly in accordance with state guidelines and local priorities. So, as with any institution, it has its pros and its cons, but it's something that we've learned to live with for 20 years now and is working well.
And I know in treatment programs, you can have the social worker fill out a SPOA application.
Sure.
And get it done.
Anyone can actually complete it. That's the good news. It doesn't have to be completed by like a physician or anyone with specialized credentials, as long as it includes the important information, verification that someone meets the eligibility criteria, and includes all the relevant details. It can go from any source as long as it goes through the proper channels. And we offer guidance in that too. So if people call us up and they have some questions about how to complete a SPOA, or any questions for that matter about the referral process or the services we provide, we try to walk them through that. At some point we might need to hand them off to our governmental partners or other resources, but we try to lend assistance with that up front.
So how many people are in search to change?
So in our housing program at any given point in time, we're housing or serving about 330, between 330 and 350 people. So that includes people in our community residence program, people in our scattered site shared apartment program, and then people living independently receiving that rental subsidy and care management service. We also have a vocational service program that I began to describe a little bit. That was added to our program mix in 1984. It's interesting how that came about.
1984, wow.
Yeah.
That's a long time ago.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Back in 1984, till 1984, we just operated residential services. We might have provided some vocational support for people within our residential program, but we didn't have a freestanding vocational service. In 1984, we received a grant, cash grant and in-kind support from the IBM Corporation. That was at a period of time when IBM was, I think, going through its own organizational changes, and either they were upsizing or downsizing or something was happening with IBM, as has been the case with them for years. And they decided to lend some of their personnel and expertise to develop our own computer skills training course for clients. And in the basement of one of our residences in Westchester, we opened our first computer skills training course with support from IBM, and that became our foray into vocational service programming. So since then we've grown. We now operate vocational services out of an office in White Plains. I'm sorry, formerly White Plains, now Valhalla. We were in White Plains for many years. We're now in Valhalla, so we have a vocational service office in Valhalla. We have one in Jefferson Valley in Westchester, and we have one in Brewster, not far from here. We also provide services in the community, so our vocational support staff will go out and meet with people on the jobs in some instances to provide on-site job support services. We bring people into the office to help them, again, develop resumes, learn different computer skills, or in some cases we might outsource some of what we do to trade schools or other affiliates, but we'll act as that conduit to help people get the resources that they need so they can get back on the job. Some people who are in a vocational program are duly enrolled in our residential services. Some are not, so they are standalone programs. There's no requirement that an individual who's enrolled in one be enrolled in the other. In some cases they are, but they do operate separately. Yes, we have some people who are referred just for vocational services with us, some who are referred just for residential, and some who are referred for both or might enter one or the other while they're with us.
So go on.
Does it have anything? Do you have anything to do with Access VR? I'm familiar with that.
Yes, in fact, Access VR is our primary funder for the vocational service. Access VR stands for Adult Career and Continuing Education Services. That's another state agency that provides funding that used to be vested. Exactly. It's another acronym, but the same function. A lot of state agencies out there, and that's an important point I should mention about our agency. We're a nonprofit operator, and we do very little by the way of privately funded enterprises. All of our services, almost all of our services, are funded through state grants and contracts or reimbursement from the state Medicaid program. So we operate under the umbrella and the contracts of various state agencies. So Access is a state agency that provides vocational support for individuals with all manner of disabilities. And I should mention this too. When Search for Change was established, we were established really as a primary provider of services, actually an exclusive provider of services for adults with mental illness. We still do that primarily, but we work with many individuals with substance use disorders. We know that we're in the midst of a national opiate epidemic, and our client population has not been insulated from it, far from it, in fact. You know, our client population is disproportionately affected by that. So many of the individuals that we serve in housing and vocational programming are coping with substance use issues. That's a big part of what we do now, too. We also work with individuals who may not be living with mental illness necessarily, or even a substance use disorder, but they might have some other type of medical condition, and that would be sufficient for them to gain access to our vocational program. Because Access opens its doors to anyone who's looking to go back to work and is facing some type of impediment to working. It could be a physical health condition, it could be a mental health condition. We'll work with all comers when it comes to that. So our mission has remained the same, helping people to overcome obstacles to self-sufficiency. But our population has broadened a little bit, and we're really looking to help as many people as we can to reach their recovery and, again, to achieve their part of the American dream.
And how many, when you have the scattered site apartments, you have to have buy-in from the landlords, right?
Absolutely.
They have to, you approach them, or they come to you, and you have to have them give up their apartment.
Absolutely. It's a very good point, and one of our big challenges. Our scattered site apartment program started in the early 1990s. That, again, was with some seed money from the Office of Mental Health, and they provided some money for us to pass along as a rent subsidy to our clients, and some additional money for us to provide what we call care management support. That simply means skilled client care workers who go out in the community and meet with people in their apartments or in our offices and just help them to troubleshoot whatever obstacles they might encounter related to their independence. Some people, again, need help paying bills, some need help negotiating with landlords, some need help, you know, managing their symptoms when they're living in their apartment, developing coping skills, taking their medication. These are the work that our care managers do. But to your point, we have to be able to find apartments. And since these are not properties that we own, properties that we lease and sublet, or in many cases our residents lease in their own names, we have to get buy-in from landlords. So how do we do that? Well, when we started the program in the 90s, we had to just run out, market ourselves to landlords, explain why they should take a chance on us. What we always tell landlords is, please recognize that if you lease to one of our residents, you're leasing to a member of the population, just like you would any of us. All of us have our strengths and our weaknesses and our good days and our bad days, and landlords never know what they're getting into with any tenant. So we explain that to them, that they should look upon our tenants the way they would anyone, because that's who our tenants are. They should also recognize there's some other benefits they gain, and one is a guaranteed rent, because we typically will guarantee that the rent is paid. We're an organization and can stand behind that, and we often act as the guarantor of the rent payments, so that makes us more saleable.
That's very
that's good.
And that's good, absolutely.
That's a bonus.
And we cultivate relationships with landlords with whom we've had long-standing arrangements. So there's some landlords with whom we started doing business back in the 90s and who are still working with us. And if we have to cultivate relationships with new landlords, we will again explain some of the upsides to it. And that's a big part of what we do. It's become more challenging in recent years because, you know, we're in a landlord's market right now. You know, for many reasons. Housing's very expensive. Landlords can afford to raise the rents because there's a lot of competition for scarce housing stock. The housing crisis of 2008 really decimated the housing market. It made the rental market more favorable for landlords because you have fewer people looking to buy, more people looking to rent. So that means our clients who have limited resources and our agencies that have limited resources have more competition. So we've had quite a bit of difficulty finding new apartments and cultivating those new relationships in recent years. So it's not without its struggles, especially now. And in fact, even this week, I've been talking to my management team and others about new strategies that we can deploy to try to find apartments a little bit more quickly because we have some people who are ready to move into their own apartments and for whom we've targeted the resources, but we just can't find the units. Or if we do, they're not in neighborhoods that are decent or safe, and we certainly don't want to place anyone in an apartment that we wouldn't want to live in or we wouldn't want a family member living in. So it's a challenge, no question, but there's some strategies that have proven themselves over the years.
What's the rent max that you pay?
It's set by, it's known as the fair market rent, and it's set largely by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. HUD, as we know, is a big government agency, a federal government agency that administers many housing programs, one of which is known as the Section 8 program, that many people have heard of. Section 8 is a rental subsidy that's provided through the federal government, not just for people with disabilities, for anyone who qualifies, by dint of their income.
Right.
Right.
And according to their standards, individuals contribute about 30% of their adjusted
Right.
income in rent. And then they set maximum rental allowances known as fair market rents that vary by geographic region. So the fair market rent for an apartment in White Plains is going to be higher than the fair market rent for an apartment in Brewster. The fair market rent for an apartment in Manhattan is going to be much higher than the fair market rent for an apartment in White Plains. So we will pay whatever the HUD-defined fair market rent is. In some cases, we have the latitude to go a little bit above that, and we have, if we needed to find apartments, but we have to, be careful about that because we have to manage our budget, of course, in order to make sure we can meet everyone's needs and keep the lights on. We also have to make sure that we can find apartments. That's a balancing act. But we generally go by the HUD-governed fair market rent guidelines.
Right.
Doing a great job.
Yeah, they're doing so much. It's really unbelievable.
That's right. That would be homeless.
Yeah,
if it wasn't for you.
Right.
Well,
for your
we're
organization.
fortunate to have. We have a great team, and I have to say, our staff are wonderful people, dedicated. Many of whom worked with us for many years. We have a wonderful board of directors and many good partnerships. Some of which are sitting right in this room. And I have to say, I've worked with Susan. I've worked with Lillian. Worked with many partners in the community in different capacities, all of whom share in our mission to work with people who are dealing with serious health conditions of all types. There's never enough to go around, and it seems the need is always mounting, but we are doing our best by ourselves and also in partnership to try to address those needs.
And what I really like about you is that you're so creative in your thinking that you come up with new ideas that may be able to expand the service to people that need it.
Thank you. We were privileged to work with a lot of creative people and always thinking about what we can do within the resource constraints.
Right.
There's a lot that's happening in healthcare around us right now, but at both the state and the federal level, and we don't know what it's going to mean for us in the long run.
Yeah.
And there's only so many dollars that we have to go around, but for that reason, it's a time to be creative because we're working with people with ever more complex service needs and stagnant or in some cases dwindling resources, and that lends itself to some creativity. So it's a challenging time to say the least. It's also an exciting time, and it's a time to create those partnerships and to continue to work and to pursue our mission. And I'm confident that we will be successful. I know that what we do will change as it has throughout our history, but I'm still optimistic about the future because I've seen that there's a lot of caring and committed people in this field.
Yeah. And you know what? Went very fast. The time on our show.
Right.
Did it? Okay.
Yep.
It went
Yeah,
very
sure
Are we
did.
there? Wow,
Yeah,
I never would have guessed
exactly.
it. 28 minutes has passed.
Thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you.
on,
Oh, it's my
explaining your
pleasure.
services.
Thank you
And
for
come
having
again,
me. I do
please.
appreciate it. It would be my pleasure. Thank you very much.
So,
keep
did we put? You have your website up there?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Website,
So this way
phone
people
number,
can
and address.
Wonderful.
get in touch with
Everything.
you and be able to access
That would be
your
wonderful.
services because.
You're welcome.